diversity and inclusion how-to series. We're really excited to have everyone join us today for such an important topic, and obviously thank everyone for coming to invest their time to learn more about it. Before we introduce everyone, we just wanted to say that everything is going to be recorded as per usual, so that you can rewatch it and share it with your team. We love to hear all of the questions that everyone has, so we will, as usual, dedicate some time at the end to answer them. But we will only be answering those that are placed in the Q&A section. So please stand, or please tell me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the Q&A section is right here. Okay, so make sure to ask your questions right here, at the bottom right of the Zoom panel. And any questions that we don't have time to answer on the webinar, we will be answering them in a document and sending them in an email afterwards. So we've previously covered the topics of how to attract diverse talent and how to remove bias from the recruitment process. And now we're going to be discussing how to create an inclusive workplace. So before we go into that, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Nathan today.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Nathan Nalla, and I'm the founder and director of Be The Riot, company that supports other organizations in creating inclusive culture, mainly through learning workshops. I'm also the diversity and inclusion manager at Soho House, a global members club, and a trustee for Blackout, a charity that has been set up in the UK to support Black queer men in the UK. That's me.
We're excited to have you here. Luke?
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm very excited, if not a bit sad, that this is the last one in the three-part series, but hey, what can we do? So I'm Luke Davis. I am the COO of a recruitment organization called BAME Recruitment and the co-founder of a careers platform called diversifying.io. And essentially, we've been going now for just over 6 years, and we're started to try and level the playing field, create more opportunities for people. But as the years have gone by, we've evolved more into a diversity and inclusion services organization. So we do a lot of exec search, talent attraction, consulting, training, and some events.
Perfect. Thank you, Luke. And Samantha.
My name is Sam, and I work at Team Taylor as an international client consultant. So I'll let you, Leah, explain what Team Taylor is about, but basically D&I is really close to my heart as I am part of several minorities, including neurodiverse ones. I have ASD and ADHD. And Leah, for number 4 in our all turtlenecked panel.
Yes, thanks, Sam. I'm Leah, so I work with Sam at Team Taylor. I previously worked with our international clients, but I now work with our marketing team in content. So at Team Taylor, we basically give our clients the platform to easily optimize the candidate experience to ensure that they can attract and hire top talent in a way that makes the recruitment process easier for both the candidate and for the recruiter. Now, a big focus that we have is creating really innovative features that enable recruiters to be more objective when hiring and reach their goals on creating a diverse workforce. So let's kick it off. I think I'd start by saying that nowadays there's such a strong focus on creating a diverse workforce, but there's not really any point doing that if you don't know how to create a space to keep them. So that's what we're going to be covering today. So yeah, what do you think makes a workplace inclusive, guys?
I think to start off maybe with
Go on.
like just a bit of theory. It might be a bit nerdy to do so. But recently I was reading a report, and I will try to find the title of it, which we can share with everyone, but kind of highlighted 2 very important things, and they might sound quite basic. But one is, you know, for people within an organization to feel that they're part of a team. So to feel a sense of group identity is really key to inclusion. And then the second part of that is also feeling that you are seen as an individual. So recognized for, you know, your strengths, the unique things that you bring to the team that will benefit the team. And I guess in some ways, these 2 kind of feel like they might contradict each other in some ways. You want to be, you know, part of this group and embedded in this group, but also at the same time stand out a little bit as an individual and recognized, not only for your strengths and what you bring to the team, but also sometimes it's for your own, you know, specific needs that you might have. whether that's around disability, whether that's around cultural needs or religious needs, whatever the case may be. We all want, you know, to be recognized for who we are. And also to obviously not feel that we have to edit ourselves in the workplace as well. Any aspect of our identities that are really important to us, that we don't feel like we need to change that to essentially fit in or get along or get on successfully in the workplace.
Yeah, I think it's a sad truth, isn't it? I think too many workplaces, unfortunately, have created environments where you can't be yourself, you can't thrive by being yourself. You have to fit in or try and create some different space or shape to do your work or to try and do good work. And I think that's what, you know, for me, what an inclusive workplace is an environment where it doesn't matter who you are, your background, your age, your sex, your religion, your race, whatever it might be, that you can just go to work as you and be appreciated for that and not having to conform to any other kind of ideal or other norm.
And I think people are so inclined to gravitate towards what they already know and what they're already comfortable with, and they almost get a bit uncomfortable with change. But the open-mindedness that you get once you actually realize that there is such a benefit in having different, whether it's, you know, we speak about this on we've spoken about this on the other webinars, and I think it's important to bring up that diversity and inclusion, it isn't just like, oh, do you have people of different skin colors here? It's diversity of thoughts, of socioeconomic background, gender. It's, you know, it's so many different things. It's not just this person, that person, he, she, you know, it's not that. So having a mix of people and being able to broaden your mind and also just, you know, have different minds put together on your workforce, it's so beneficial. And the moment people realize this and they really start embracing that, I think it really changes the game for a lot of different companies, because you don't just want to end up with a bunch of people that are all exactly the same, because then you're never really going to try anything new.
Yeah, exactly. It leads to more innovation. It leads to better collaboration in teams. I mean, I've got some cheesy statistics.
Love it. Throw them our way, please.
What happens when you send questions in advance? You just start, you know. But yeah, no. So Deloitte, you know, have found that inclusive companies are 1.7 times more likely to be leaders of innovation within their field. And then also, you know, employees work and collaborate more, as I've kind of just said, but that teamwork and collaboration then leads to 120% more likely to hit financial goals, which I think, you know, we often do focus on this moral side of diversity and inclusion. And I know we'll get on to talking about the business case maybe a bit later on, but I think it is really important to recognize that it benefits everyone, not just, you know, people from underrepresented groups. So it benefits the business as a whole, and leads to better results from a business perspective. And we really need to highlight that and talk about that.
Absolutely. So how do we create an environment?
I think it's really good.
Sorry. Go.
Sorry, yeah, no, it's really good, Nathan, that you mentioned that, because a lot of we mostly have recruiters amongst our attendees, and a lot of recruiters never really know how to get their management on board. And it's through management that they get, you know, for instance, budget allocated to get DE&I developed in the company. And as we said before, it's something that you need to mention, because as you say, it's not just a moral issue. You have to use that as an incentive for your management to be on board. Just like, you know, I wouldn't say that management's heart is in their wallet, but at the end of the day, they need to make profits. And if you manage to show them that the numbers are going to be increasing and then the company is going to be profitable, this is a massive incentive for your management.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, big time. And I think there's also a risk in not doing it. And you know, one of the big questions always, isn't it, like how do you get your CEO to understand that this is an important priority? And I think there's no one set answer to that, but I think there's definitely the different things that you can kind of say or influence a CEO into thinking. For example, what are your competitors doing? If they're doing this, is that meaning they're going to get talent more easily and they've got the best talent, access to the best talent? Or if you don't do it, what's that going to leave you as your culture in 2 or 3 years' time? Are you going to be able to still, you know, going to be left behind? Or are you going to be another one of those businesses that all group think, so you'll pile off in the same direction, agreeing with each other, never challenging each other, and then before you know it, you know, Netflix have come along and, you know, video rental isn't a thing anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's, you know, numerous examples of it. So it is, you know, it is a business imperative, isn't it? It clearly is.
And it's also good to know, you know, if you're looking at, okay, well, these are the people I need to speak to in order to reach this goal, whether it's a CEO or just C-level executives or what it is. And, you know, I don't want to specifically say that C-levels always act this way or always act that way, but know your audience as well. Think about, it sounds sad, but you almost have to pitch it to them, right? If they don't get it, and if it's not something that they are already doing, then you kind of have to pitch it to them. So if you're going to, let's say, for example, a CFO, because you need a budget for it.
Yeah.
What can you do to tell them, right, okay, this is going to be beneficial because this is going to make you money, or whatever it is, as much as we'd love to think that it is a situation where they might just care because they should. It's not always that way. So having these statistics and knowing these things about different companies and things that have been proven is a really good way to present this to your management, to get them involved. You know, don't just talk about the obvious side of things, that people deserve to feel included and everything at the workplace. Sometimes you do need to bring up these other things, and they can be really beneficial to know those things. So just moving on to, you know, how do you think we create an environment that would match expectations, and what can we do to support people at work?
So I think, and this is a biggie, right? Because there's so much focus on the attraction part. You know, people have made big statements, they've made big public commitments, and they're wanting to be seen to be doing this. And I think then that has, in a lot of cases, created a fair bit of tension for those that are already working environments. And I think, you know, as much effort and energy has been on what is our external take on how we're doing with D&I, there should be as much, if not more, focus on what are we doing internally. So I think the big thing is how do you create an environment that matches expectations? I think you have to listen, you have to be realistic, you have to accept that everybody's on a journey here. And I say this a lot, but I haven't seen a single organization that's nailing this, not even close, no matter how it appears. And I hear it a lot from organizations say, gosh, I wish we were more like X or more like Y. And I'm like, yeah, but they have challenges here and they've got challenges there. And yes, they've done well with the female bit, or they've done well with the race bit, or whatever. But everybody's on a journey here. And I think the sooner you realize that nobody's anywhere near it, but I think what people want is the commitment to the change. Like, what are you doing? If I ask anyone in your organization, what's this company's approach to inclusion? Are we all going to say the same thing, or are we going to kind of go, oh, well, I'm not sure about. So I think the big thing is just be clear, be honest, be open, be realistic.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's about that authenticity, and whatever you're representing externally needs to be true to what is actually going on internally. There was a lot of backlash we saw last summer, you know, after George Floyd's murder, and, you know, all the attention that was drawn to the Black Lives Matter movement. So many companies put out statements, and then, you know, people responded with, well, actually, I work for you, or I've been a customer, and these have been my really negative experiences around diversity and inclusion. And unfortunately, you know, that's often the case. And I also think that, well, actually, I've been in organizations that have done this, where they've literally, you know, bunked all the people of color in a room when they're doing sort of marketing photography for their comms and their marketing strategies and things like that. And they want to present a really diverse looking organization. And so what they do is get all the different people from different ethnic groups in different departments that have never met each other before and put them in a room and take pictures. And then when a person starts working for the organization, obviously that's not, you know, that's not going to be their true sort of experience while working there. And it sounds really funny, and we're kind of laughing about it, but then, you know, I was also reading recently some of the impacts of being the only one within an organization, or the only one within the team. And so McKinsey were speaking about this in their report, one of their reports recently, and talking about how, you know, being the only one really does make you feel under more pressure. You're more likely to experience microaggressions, and you feel the need to really have to do more to prove your worth and prove your ability within the space. And so if you do happen to be that only person from your ethnic background, or you're the only woman in the team, then there's a lot of added pressure to that. And we find that also leads to people not sticking around, right? So if the ultimate goal is that long-term diversity, then you have to be kind of true and honest to where you're at.
Exactly. And as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I think it's so important that so many people are focused on like, okay, do we have a picture of this person on the career site? And like, oh, we have that person in that department. Let's get a picture of them and put them on the career site. You know, so many people are so focused on what can we do to get people to feel comfortable to apply for our jobs? What can we do to get people to feel like they're welcome here? Okay. And then they arrive and then what the hell? Basically, it's like, you know, so it's really important to ensure that you practice what you preach, you know, you walk the talk, and you don't just lay out false promises for people to join your company, because I think it's so easy as well to be in a position to say like, oh, we do this and this and this, and you think that you're doing things right, but then try and really empathize with that person when they start at your company and they realize, right, they've completely misled me into this role. They've made me think that I'm going to get this and this and this and this and this and this. And they think just because I've signed a contract, I'm going to stay. No, absolutely not. People, when they know their worth, they're going to leave and they're going to go to a different company. If they don't already know it, they're going to find it and then they're going to leave anyway. And they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't, you know, that shouldn't even be a thing that they should be doing. And I think, you know, we spoke about this quite briefly when we sort of had a pre-discussion on this, but I think that one of the best things that you can do to let someone know that they're welcome and to make them feel safe coming into an environment is telling them, either if you don't know or if you don't feel as though that you're at the point where you want to be when it comes to diversity and inclusion, be really, really honest with them from the get-go and tell them, you know, it could be in the interview process or it could be when they sign. You could say, this is a goal that we have. We're not there yet, but we're really working on this. And on day one, let them know, if at any point you ever get discriminated against, if at any point anyone ever makes you feel like you're less than because of this or whatever it is, this is the person that you go to, and you do not need to worry about being demoted. You don't need to worry about getting fired. You don't need to worry about anything, because this is a safe place and that's what we're trying to create. And the same goes to you. If, you know, let them know what the consequences are as well if there is any discrimination in the office. Like, let them know from day one exactly what your code of conduct is, so that you can set expectations and then also follow through with that. If you know, they do come to you at some point, let them know it's a safe space. Because not only does that make someone feel comfortable when they join the company, but it also sets a standard for them too. You know, they can't be discriminated against and they can't discriminate as well.
I want to bounce off something that you guys have been saying. We're talking about inclusion and everything, and I think a lot of companies forget about equality and equity. As you said, everybody's like super hands-on when it comes to trying to attract diverse employees, because people need diverse experiences. And once you're there, you sign your contract, you're there, and you feel like you're trapped. And then you realize what's going on. Like when you said something, Nathan, that I really resonate with, that when you're one of those minorities, you really feel the extra pressure. You feel the pressure, for instance, as a woman of color, I'm half Black, I feel the pressure of, when I'm speaking, to talk white. So if I'm being assertive and I'm being overeducated, I don't want to sound aggressive because of the angry Black woman trope that is going to be thrown my way. Or being neurodiverse, I have to be careful how I express myself, because there's always going to be someone in the room who's going to be shaking their head and thinking, oh, she doesn't understand, or she's not qualified to do this, to do that. And the thing is that there is what I've noticed in every single company I've been working for, either as a steady employee or as a freelance, there is a massive, massive gap when it comes to equity and equality. I always hear, oh, we're equal, we give equal opportunities. It's not true. There are people who need more support, more help than others. And that's something that a lot of company fails to see, acknowledge, and they don't try to bridge the gap for. And it's something that is pretty rampant. I think a lot of people just see D&I as diversity, and for the rest, they don't know what equality or equity is. And then if you don't have equity and equality, you can't have inclusion.
Yeah, 100%. It's true. It's true. There are obviously very specific challenges that people do face based on their experiences, and then, you know, organizations need to really listen to those challenges and put in steps in place that directly address those challenges, rather than just be like, one size fits all, here you go, you've all got the same opportunities. It doesn't quite work.
No, it doesn't. And I think organizations, part of this change they need to make is as much around your employees will feel the way they feel, and you can't deny them that, whether you think it's right that they feel that way or not. And I think that's one of the big mistakes that I see a lot, is that it's almost like you come and join this company, so it's kind of fit in or don't, and that completely invalidates then what someone's real life experiences are of being in the organization. And I do think, and I see this loads and loads, like people don't know what they don't know. And I think particularly those people that are from the kind of background privilege that I have, is that they're in this very nice zombie state, not really seeing what the problem is or addressing everything on their own frame of reference. Well, I didn't feel like that, so why is that person feeling like that? They just don't create space for it to empathize with it or understand it. And I think that's one of the big blockers in moving these things forward.
Absolutely. So when it comes to onboarding and having people join your company, when it comes to certain policies, for example, do you think having clear policies and procedures in place are a good thing to have from the get-go, or what are your thoughts on that?
Policies, yeah, 100%. I think you touched on something really important earlier, Leah, when you talked about letting people know straight away, if you do experience something that makes you feel uncomfortable, that here's the place that you can go, here's the person you can talk to have that addressed. And I think, alongside these D&I statements that companies might put out externally, there needs to be that sort of same sentiment internally as well. So, whether it's a D&I statement, whether it's in the anti-bullying and anti-harassment policies that clearly outline that there's a zero tolerance approach. And then also I think about other aspects of policy that, affect people of color in particular, and often people who are gender non-conforming, so LGBTQ plus communities, things like dress codes. Women, everyone is affected by these policies, and people, they can create barriers for people really from the get-go as well. And so, yeah, I think there's so many different ways that policies play a key role. But then, when someone starts working at an organization, do they sit there and read a policy? Most likely they don't. What is most important is when they actually see the action that comes from it. So when they see, their manager responding to microaggressions in the workplace, when they see people being called out for certain behaviors at work, these are the things that really sit and resonate with people more than, just having a policy that lives somewhere that people are aware of, but they've never read it, and it doesn't really connect with their experience.
Yeah, you have to have those policies and just like enforce them. Everybody's being very sensitive and tiptoeing around this, like, oh, people's freedom. Yeah, somebody's freedom to be a jackass shouldn't infringe my freedom to come to work and feel like my integrity or me as an individual are respected and I can feel safe. I should feel safe in my workplace. I would love to see more workplace actually give some kind of, guidelines and behavioral guidelines, actually set boundaries and call out people who are being disrespectful. Because sometimes you see astounding behaviors, but like in some environments, people don't dare calling people out. But you need to really take stands and stand up for things that are right. Because at the end of the day, if your employee experience is crap because you're not daring to take those measures and make minorities or diverse groups feel comfortable in your company, this is going to spread like wildfire. Glassdoor is a thing. And I think CEOs and management should remember that. I have a colleague that always says that even the longest rope has an end. There at some point, all the abuse that are going in companies or all the bad behaviors, at some point it stops because people talk and then you can't attract the talents you want to attract anymore. And then it's just bad press. Every publicity is not good publicity. At some point it just backfires. So it has to be mandatory. Like when you have those trainings where you see sometimes people showing up, it's just like 2-3 people, and then the rest of the minority groups of a company. When it comes to D&I, you should make those trainings mandatory. It should be part of your culture, your values, and make it mandatory. End of the story, no negotiation. So people show up, they learn, and then they understand that everyone in the company takes this seriously, and then there is no more slippery slopes and weird languages or weird behaviors happening, and people like me or other people that are part of minorities or diverse groups feeling uncomfortable.
I think just to jump on the back of that as well, I think companies often have a difficult time enforcing these policies and this zero tolerance approach all the way up to the top. And sometimes it feels like if a person is so senior, they can get away with things that other people wouldn't necessarily get away with. And it made me think about, okay, well, maybe organizations really need to introduce policies and processes specifically for those times. So, if it's the HR department having to, I don't know, take someone through a disciplinary process who's more senior to the most senior person in HR, then obviously that has its own sort of ethical and hierarchical challenges. And so at what point do you bring in that external support to then, the independent HR consultants who can then take over that process so it doesn't feel like it's sort of convoluted and biased. But I think, people need to see demonstrations from sort of the very top to really feel that there is a true sort of stance around diversity and inclusion, especially when it comes to discrimination and microaggressions and things like that.
Yeah, one thing I've seen that's helping to embed policies like that, or this behavioural things that we talk about at the very top where the rules don't seem to apply, is reciprocal mentoring. So where you've got a CEO or a very senior director who is mentoring, but also being mentored by somebody else in the organisation, particularly maybe from different groups, and helping them see firsthand the human impact of some of those things. And I've seen where you're in an environment where there really is genuine safe space where you can talk about stuff, it will be to actually have the person who's the reciprocal mentor, the more junior person, actually call out and say, look, that meeting when you spoke up in front of the whole company and you said X, Y, and Z, this is how it made me feel. Now, is that what you intended? And it's trying to get that balance better between what they intend to do, or the bad habits they've got, or the behaviors that were okay in the 90s that aren't okay in the 2020s. I think all of that can make sure the policies are actually living, breathing things that you commit to.
I think before it even gets to the point of people, reporting issues, or making sort of a big sort of grievance or complaint, or I say big, but I mean they often sound big when we're thinking about doing these things. It's about creating the safe spaces for people to have those conversations before it gets to that point, right? So it's in the focus groups, it's in the town hall meetings, it's in the engagement surveys, where people can share their experiences as feedback rather than I'm making a complaint about something that's happened. And then the organization responding to that and making changes and strategizing to actually address those issues that are happening. Because it's oftentimes that things end up becoming a real issue, like a PR issue, when they've gone too far. And there's so many opportunities to, sort those issues out before it gets to that stage.
So with organizations, where do you think, or like what level do you think it should start with the organization? Because we see a lot of companies, perhaps the larger ones who maybe have a larger budget, or maybe it's just a stronger focus for them, they actually have a team or a designated person who is hired to work on diversity and inclusion. So do you think that should just be a part of the HR team? Do you feel as though that should be something separate? You said perhaps having someone independent, like an independent HR person who's completely unbiased, that's not actually in the organization. What are your thoughts?
I mean, in terms of the independent HR support, I was speaking specifically to, issues that are reported, so those complaints that are essentially grievances or disciplinary action that needs to be dealt with. I definitely think that, you need an in-house D&I team rather than one person in most large organizations, definitely. I think we have to see diversity and inclusion work as being every single person's responsibility. You have to see it as a culture change program that doesn't have an end. It's an ongoing culture change program. We're constantly working towards diversity. We're constantly working towards inclusion, equity, all of these things. And we'll always come up against challenges. And I think that because it affects so many different aspects of the business, if you think about diversity and inclusion, it can affect your marketing, it can affect recruitment, it can affect how you engage with communities, your stakeholders. There's so many different facets to it that I think it's definitely important to have a core centralized team with the mandate of essentially delegating projects and work and collaborating with different parts of the organization. So I guess one example is the work that we've been doing at Soho House around our pledge, which we released last July in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was our sort of commitment to people from BIPOC communities, so Black, Indigenous and or people of color, not only within our teams, you know, not only within our member base, but also how we interact and engage with communities, you know, looking at our supply chains, looking at, you know, more of the global impacts that we're having on BIPOC communities. But it resulted in, you know, a pledge that was essentially maybe around 80 different projects across the business that needed to be rolled out. And our team is, you know, a pretty small little team. And so for every single action point, we had to pull in, okay, this person who works in recruitment needs to be a part of this. This person who works in comms needs to be a part of this project. This person in procurement needs to be a part of this project. And building those sort of small working groups and teams to make sure that every single aspect is dealt with. And that alongside that, there's accountability. So the progress is being tracked. And we're seeing the changes happen over time, and you know, we're able to pull in support where there are different challenges that come up, and you know, different expertise, reaching out to people externally, so D&I, external D&I consultants as well, and it makes it sound like, you know, it's a massive, huge piece of work, but that's because it is. And you know, if we think about history, we think about the changes that have had to happen in society, you know, LGBT inclusion, you think about women's rights, even in the last, you know, the last few decades or the last century, we've seen inequality since the beginning of time. And so we have to be sort of very committed to this change journey being quite a long journey. It's not going to happen overnight. It may take years, it may take decades, because we're talking about societal issues. We're not just talking about our specific organization in silo.
Mm. And what would you say are some of the common challenges then? Because I completely agree that in a perfect world, it would be like, okay, now we're going to be diverse and inclusive. Okay, now we're perfect. Spray the fairy dust, throw the rainbows and the confetti everywhere, and everything's perfect. But it's just not reality. Like, it's not realistic. So, you know, setting up actual changes and like making sure, I would say at least, like, you know, when you are setting up these changes, understand that not everyone's going to be perfect from the get-go. People are going to say things, people might, whether it be like microaggressions or it might just be little comments here and there that aren't okay and they should not be tolerated, but call them out and actually give feedback on how someone can be better. But more importantly, people need to be accepting of that feedback as well. Because like you said, it is a societal issue. It's not just like, oh, this company's racist or this company's sexist. It's, you know, it's a big thing that's been accumulated over such a long time. And it's a group effort. But what would you say are some of the common challenges then, and how can people overcome them?
So I think one of the big challenges, and I hear this a lot, is and look, obviously somewhere that Nathan's got has got budgets, has got teams, is able to focus on these things. And I hear from a lot of startups, scale up, small organizations who say, oh gosh, like, you know, we don't have the budget for a head of D&I, or we're only 10 people big. So what does this mean for us? And I think that's understandable, but actually a lot of this stuff doesn't need to cost any money, doesn't need to be any budget. You can have people focusing on the things, and you know, often I think it can be quite overwhelming that when you start to look at this as a challenge, that you just don't know where to start. So I thought it might be helpful. I actually put together kind of a very quick 5-point action plan, and really this is for any organization or team who is thinking about, well, look, you know, I don't know where to start. What can I do? And this, by the way, is not out of a textbook. This is literally just out of kind of like, you know, things that I've seen work. If you're a 10-person organization, a 50-person organization, what can you do? So I think the first one is that listen and understand bit. I think too many organizations have raced with, let's run, let's go market this, let's go, you know, talk about that. Actually take some time to understand where you're at, like talk to your existing employees. How has their experience been? How does it feel to be the one? You know, if you could change things for that person, what would they say that you do. So really, really encourage that. I think the other big bit that underpins, and this is where so many initiatives fail, is not removing fear. And if you don't remove fear, that fear of consequence, that if I say this, will that affect my promotion chances? I mean, I heard a story about a D&I person recently who was suggesting a 4-day week, and people were saying, oh, that won't be good for your long-term prospects here. And it's like, why on earth would that sort of thing have a personal consequence? It shouldn't. I think once you've done that, then have a look at what you've got, your policies, your processes, your employment contracts. And I've had to do it recently. The employment contracts we've got for our own company were written 6 years ago, definitely don't reflect the world that we're in now in terms of the way it's structured and the human-centered approach that so many orgs have got. Once you've got a good baseline, then start to actually talk about what you've got already. Again, I don't think there's any organization I've seen where there aren't some really good success stories and people that are different or people that are doing well. Like, start to positively reinforce this. It's actually lots of really good success that you can share. The more stories you talk about, the more role models you have, the more likely people are going to want to come and work with you. That attraction bit, right? Create something people want to come to. Don't just market to people so that they come to you. And then I think once you've done that, this training piece, and Sam, you were talking about some experiences, and I think this individual accountability bit, this people realizing that particularly if you are, want to be an ally or want to be there for others, you can't sit on the fence anymore. It's not okay. If you see things or hear things, you have to act upon it. You can't be a passive bystander anymore. That is making you complicit in the things that are going on. And I think once you've got all of that in place, then continue to be asking yourself, what I intend in this situation, is that the same as the actual actions? Constantly be asking yourself that question. I want to announce something to the company. Is that in line with who I want us to be, that we want to be? And I think if you did all of those things, I think in 6 months you'd be in a way better place than you probably are now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, by the way.
Thanks, Luke. You're the best.
Nice.
No, that's a really, really good steps. And I think people are probably going to ask for that as well. So just so everyone knows, we'll probably include that in the email as well, so that people can keep that in mind when it comes to setting up their own processes. And I think it's so good to have that in place and know exactly what it is that you're going to do, but also just start from somewhere. And I think that's a huge problem that a lot of companies have, is they don't know where to start. They want to do everything in one go and they want to make everything picture perfect, but they don't even ask the first question of, how do our employees feel? And one thing that I think is really beneficial is anonymous feedback, because you can go to, let's say, you'll have your HR director or D&I person, whoever it is, and they'll go to people in the organization, ask them face to face, how do you feel about this and this and this? If there is a problem in your organization, you can absolutely guarantee the fact that no one's going to answer that question properly to you, because they're going to be too scared. They're going to be scared they're going to get demoted. They're going to be scared that they're not, that they're not going to be taken seriously, or that they're going to open themselves up, be vulnerable, and then that's just going to be taken advantage of. Yeah. So something that we actually use at Team Taylor is a platform called Winning Temp, which is basically a platform that allows you to give anonymous feedback. You can customize different questions, and then you can send them out to all of your employees, and they can come back, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about this? On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about this? You can leave feedback, it's going to be completely anonymous. Or are you okay with your manager hearing about this, but it's still anonymous, but it will go directly to them, so on and so forth. It can be brutal. People are very straightforward with their feedback, especially when it's anonymous, but sometimes you need to start there and you need to hear that. So I think removing the fear, letting people know, either have the conversations one-to-one and tell them, you don't need to be scared to tell us the truth. We want to be better. We want to know. Or do it anonymously if you're too scared to find out the actual feedback yourself.
And ask real questions.
Yes.
It has to be painful and uncomfortable, but that's what it is about. A lot of the time people, again, beat around the bush and ask very irrelevant questions. And when your employees are going to see those questions, if it's very random questions like, would you like to have more fruits in the fruit basket in the kitchen? This is not what your employees want.
Yeah. No, exactly. No,
have those questions. Do you feel safe at work? Are you afraid of your manager? Okay, formulate them differently, but when there is fear, remove the fear by asking those questions that are very uncomfortable. Do you feel like you can express yourself freely about issues you've encountered? Do you feel like you have a go-to person you can speak with in the company? Do you think that we need to have this go-to person? What do you suggest we could do to make this workplace more inclusive? Again, because you can go directly to the diverse employees and they might be scared to open up. So yeah, anonymous surveys are absolutely wonderful for that.
Yeah, and it's don't get me wrong, I understand that it's uncomfortable. You're putting yourself out there and you're going to get feedback that could potentially be really good or really bad. And there's always going to be that natural feeling of, oh, what if someone doesn't like me? But if you really know, or if you're avoiding doing something like this, the chances are that you know there's a problem in your organization. You don't want to fix it and you don't want to be confronted by that. But it's so important to start there and actually find out how your employees feel, not just like Google, oh, how do people feel when it comes to blah, 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 blah. No, ask the people that you're actually working with so you can fix the problem that you have at hand.
And remember that it's about people wanting to stay, because otherwise your employees are going to leave and they will talk about it. They won't talk about it to you. They will talk about it to other people. Remember that, keep that in mind. It's about employee retention and it's about your reputation as an employer, because that is going to spread like wildfire. When I'm headhunted by companies, the first thing I do is I look the reviews on Glassdoor, and I also go directly on LinkedIn and ask their employees, and especially the employees that look like me, how things are actually happening in the company. So remember that.
It's a good tip for other people.
I was just going to jump in and say that actually sometimes waiting for all company engagement surveys can be a real challenge. And so if you're a person who's in sort of a middle management position, this is something that you can do within your own team, something that you might be able to do on a small scale with your customers, your stakeholders as well, just to kind of get a snapshot of how people are feeling, especially because a lot of the time organizations also want to be in control of what those surveys look like and what those questions are as well. And so if you're not in the position of leadership to make those decisions, sometimes there are things that you can do yourself to gather that information.
Absolutely. Guys,
it's time for questions section.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just realized what time it is. I think it's time for the questions. This is
all right, so I'm opening the Q&A chat. So if any one of you wants to ask questions, remember,
do it in the Q&A.
Don't ask the ADHD/ASD girl to read both. Go into the Q&A little chat thingy that is on the menu below on the right-hand side. In your Zoom window, and keep asking questions there, because I'm going to miss whatever question you probably asked in the chat. So we're going to start with Chen, who probably wants a tip actually that you guys can send later on. Our company, Fiber, is looking for organization that can help for diversity in the tech world, like Women in Tech and more. Do you have recommendations in Berlin and London?
So short answer is yes. Probably worth, Chen, feel free to send me a message afterwards, because I've got quite a long and slightly incomplete answer. There's some really good companies in London, not so many in Berlin, but definitely can give you some options.
And Chen, don't worry, we're going to share our panelists' contact in the email you're going to receive with the recording, either today or tomorrow. All right, moving on to Alicia Pedro. How can we promote equity over equality? Can you please give some examples of initiatives we can take?
Well, I think it's in a lot of what we've talked about around really, as a first step, taking time to understand what the specific challenges people are facing actually are. You know, thinking about the different aspects of diversity. We've talked a bit around neurodiversity, we've talked a bit around race, religion, thinking about these different aspects and wanting to essentially just look at what the key challenges are there. Some of the examples that I can think of, I guess, are in sort of learning and development opportunities or in hiring opportunities, where you can essentially aim to either recruit people or pull sort of candidates from certain backgrounds or certain communities in order to bump up and make sure that that diversity is there, right? To be representative. That's a form of equity, because you're putting in extra effort to get that diversity in, right? Also, when it comes to hiring, I've seen other organizations make sure that, you know, their graduate programs are providing a certain amount of information about the hiring process. That's probably something that has been addressed in the other webinars. But I think those are just a couple examples of things that you can do, to provide that extra support to specific groups.
All right, thank you, Nathan. That we have Mimi asking a question: how best can a woman of color facilitate workshops on diversity and inclusion without being judged? because she's a minority, of course, conclusions will be made that she's there for her own benefit?
I think this is a very real challenge. One of the big challenges that people of color in the workplace often have is that sort of expectation that you are the spokesperson on diversity and inclusion, and having all the answers. But if you feel you have the expertise and want to share stories, then what I would say is definitely do your research, and don't only speak to your own experience, right? When you talk about inclusion, talk about intersectionality, talk about your own experiences, as well as experiences of other types of women of color. So, it might be the Indian experience or the Chinese experience. It might be the Black African experience. There's so many nuances and different experiences that people have, that I think will really resonate with people, and show that you've done that due diligence and it's not just about you. But I also hope that the audience wouldn't feel that way anyway. But I do hear that's a real struggle.
All right, thanks, Nathan. Okay, question that you guys can answer actually on the chat yourself. It's for Ifa Gilligan. Is there any specific training courses you would recommend to help educate our recruitment team and also the wider company on D&I? And I think you're going to be sharing this with all the attendees as well in the email.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's some amazing free resources. There's an organization called Be Applied, who are doing a lot of work to try and remove CVs from recruitment processes. We'll share the link afterwards, but they've got some amazing free videos that you can watch, but you can also book yourself onto specific training, which teaches you how to be better as a D&I recruiter. And a small plug for my service as well. I've recently built a training course specifically for recruiters, for agencies and internal talent acquisition teams, because I do think that recruiters are finding it difficult because they're looking at this challenge in slightly the wrong way.
Yeah. There was a question or a comment that was actually on the Q&A thing that I actually wanted to point out, because I think it's really important that people understand something. So Shayna Hodkins said, 100% agree about the D&I candidate being independent from HR. Sorry, I'm really dyslexic, so just give me a second. I'm so sorry.
Independent.
HR, unfortunately, is often quicker to serve the company than the employee, leaving employees out in the cold when they experience a D&I issue. Here's the thing. And it's important to understand, HR, obviously, you're speaking with someone who is supposed to be dealing with people. Absolutely. If there's a problem, you should be able to go to them and speak with them. But the reason why it's so important, in my opinion, at least, to have a team that works with diversity and inclusion is because HR, I'm sorry, is not there to protect you. HR is not there to protect you. They are there to protect the company, and they are there to, and it's obviously they want to protect the people as well. And that's something they should be doing, just as they should, but they're there to basically protect the company and serve the company. So it is really important to have a group of people that are there for the people as well. And they're really there to actually focus on the well-being of the people. And for example, if the company is doing something against them, then they should be speaking up, and then they can be dealing with HR or whoever it is that needs to deal with that. But there is a difference between a HR team and a D&I team. And I think that's quite important too, for people to realize.
Bouncing on this, it's also Shaina, very interesting question. What do you do if your CHRO is violating D&I policies? $1 million question. Let's go.
Leave.
Yeah.
Genuinely, I think it is a real problem, and I feel really awful for people that are experiencing that, but I don't know a good answer around what you can do. If it's well known and the CEO or the leadership team know that that's happening, I think really, what choice do you have than to leave?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think and I also think that if you're at that point, and this might not be this particular scenario, it could be any scenario. If you're at the point where you feel like this organization is terrible at D&I, I'm ready to leave, then I have seen happen in one organization is people getting together and writing an open letter. And this open letter sharing feedback, specific experiences that people have had, and then also recommendations for the organization, and shared anonymously as well with senior leadership. And I saw that within that organization, there was definitely a real response to that. But I would say that, you kind of do have to be willing to leave if things don't go the way that you plan, because in some organizations there will be, you know, really negative repercussions for doing something like that. But I think, you know, as potentially a last measure, be the riot, you know, shake things up a bit. Sometimes that leads to genuine change.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
completely agree. Love the open ladder idea, by the way.
Leah, I don't.
No, but it's good. No, but I really no, I think it's I really love when people stand up for themselves and aren't scared of whether it's your CEO or if it's your direct manager, if you're head of this or head of that. If you're being treated badly and you have the guts to stand up and say something about it, good for you. Seriously, good for you. As you should.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. Be the riot.
Marcus Olberg. Could you give some practical examples of initiatives that work and perhaps some that don't work, or common mistakes that companies make when trying to put these initiatives in place? Of course, what initiative is best depends on the organization, but one or a few practical examples would be great.
It's quite a broad question, isn't it?
Top tip.
One that comes to mind definitely sort of straight away is, you know, employee resource groups. And I say that because so many organizations, you know, roll these out in terms of D&I. So, you know, having a women's group, having a group for people of color, having a group for LGBTQ+. And these can be incredibly supportive tools for people within the organization, hubs for people to go to have some challenging conversations, to see themselves represented in different parts of the business, connect, network with other people that they might not be able to connect with ordinarily. Some of the challenges often are around whether these become kind of silo and divisive. You know, you've got all these independent groups talking about different issues and potentially not collaborating and connecting. And also myself being Black and gay in some organizations, it's like, which ERG do I join? Do I join the LGBT plus, or do I join the BAME or BIPOC or whatever it might be called? So it's recognizing that these are just hubs, and they're not meant to be, I guess they're not meant to be silos. They're meant to work together in unison. They're meant to recognize intersectionality within people's identities. And they can be very powerful tools to bring about change. And so I guess just to give one small example, one organization where I worked, I was part of a BAME network, and they'd brought in, they'd been given a very small budget, but they'd been able to bring in external D&I facilitators to deliver trainings, to lead focus group sessions. And also what they'd done as an ERG was put together a resource. And basically this organization was doing a number of events, speaking events and conferences and things like that. And they really wanted to be representative and make sure that the speakers they were bringing in and the panels were diverse. And that was always a challenge. And so it was the BAME network that pulled together this resource, this database of speakers from all different backgrounds that people across the organization could then tap into and begin using. And so that's just one example of how it brought about change within that organization. But yeah, it's always important to roll things out in the right way and to be cognizant of inclusion and intersectionality when doing so.
Thank you, Nathan. I have a question here from Anonymous. Thanks for this session. It's really interesting. When setting up a DEI policy, do you have precise KPIs, examples that have an impact and that companies should work on and engage, commit on results to make sure DEI is a reality and not a fantasy?
Yeah, 100%. Probably good for both of us to answer this. But I suppose the perspective from my point of view, the stuff that you can do right now is absolutely be monitoring your attraction. So who is applying to your jobs, monitor who's joining your company and the diversity of that, and then who's leaving. And if you look at those 3 different data points and look at the trends between them, and are they changing or moving, or what's the progress, or are we bringing in lots of people but they're also the same people that are leaving, I think that as an initial marker in the sand, you then see the complete circle and cycle, I think is really, really important. And then having some robustness around that employee feedback bit, that anonymous feedback, and ranking and rating people's feelings about certain things today, and then doing it again in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, I think would be the basic stuff I would say that you should have as a minimum.
And I think that's really helpful. And I think never assume that your D&I initiative is working. And don't just think that, oh yeah, we've set up this group, everyone's happy now. That's not how it works. And so it's really important to make sure that whatever initiatives you are doing, there is that monitoring of engagement. You know, sometimes it is literally numbers, how many people are actually engaging with the initiative in terms of your population. Sometimes it again is gathering that feedback. You know, how did you feel about this International Women's Day event? What was missing? What could we do to improve? Like constantly learning and constantly evaluating how you're doing and gaining that feedback. I know that's not a KPI, but I mean, it's still really valuable.
Yeah, but some organisations set targets. Like we want to make sure that of the next hires that we make, that we've got roughly 20% from a certain background, and we need that to make the progress. So I think you need to set your own KPIs though. I think where people go wrong is that this problem is manifesting itself in a similar way at most organisations, but the solutions for you to solve them can be different in every one. So you've got to figure out what your problems are to go and solve the problem.
Okay, I'm browsing through questions because you also have comments at the same time, so I'm like lost. Okay, how can we promote board members to become more diverse aware, other than to increase profits? It becomes very difficult as a person from an ethnic background to influence them and get branded as a troublemaker.
Yeah, it is a really challenging one, and I guess typically I do lean to wanting to talk about the business case, which we've talked about, and if they're unresponsive in that sense, then what feedback, what stories of people's lived experiences can you share to kind of garner a bit of I guess a bit of empathy, to really understand the impact that a non-inclusive or non-diverse culture is having on people directly. If you can make these links and these connections, then you would hope the board would be responsive. If not, then I guess, again, it might be that situation where this isn't the right organization, because you really do need the leadership to be brought in.
It's really difficult. We do a lot of work diversifying boards, and boards have got a huge problem. And I think it's bracing yourself for that you might only make small wins with a lot of boards at the moment, being honest and open and realistic about it. There's certain individuals that frankly probably need to do their time and go and retire or finish because they're just not helping this agenda whatsoever. So I think it's probably that emotional resilience as much as anything is to brace yourself around to change what you can change, influence what you can influence. But I think unfortunately this is a journey, not an easy, quick destination.
What advice would you give for a small business without dedicated HR and teams?
So I would say, don't worry, you don't need HR or D&I to do this for you. You can do all of those things right now yourself. Get together, talk about it. I always think link D&I back to your own company values and make sure that what actually are your company's values are the same things that you then think about when you're looking at diversity and inclusion, and just start. You don't need to wait until you're a certain size. I think if anything, I see a lot of problems with when you get to 40, 50, 60 people big as a startup or scale up, the problem's already in place by that point, and it's much more difficult to fix it. When you're a really small organization, get the stuff in place now and it will definitely reward you long term.
And I think just off the back of that as well, it is really valuable to have D&I embedded in the values. And I think even within, specific job descriptions, and what is expected of a person in their specific role, connect their role to D&I. And then also one thing that you can probably do for free is build an advisory board, an inclusion advisory board. So it might be people outside of the small, the small startup organization that are really passionate, speak on the issue. They'll be willing to give you, an hour or 2 hours a month come together. You can ask them questions and you can get their thoughts and present ideas to them and get their thoughts and feedback on it.
Do you have any, that's from Katarzyna, do you have any experience with auditing, evaluating organization, tools, indicators, which must be taken into account to describe company as being D&I? What do you recommend?
There is one that I came across recently. I hope this answers the question, but I mean, if you are based in the UK and you want to sort of deep dive into issues around race specifically, there is a company called Flare Impact that do this work, and they provide sort of benchmarks, they provide dashboards around specifically tracking and measuring whether your organization is changing in terms of anti-racist culture. So I came across them so recently, and their work is really incredible and really exciting. So I thought I'd put that in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of really innovative companies that are starting to do some of that work and the blend of tech and human emotion and content and things, but it's quite a fragmented market. It's difficult to pick one.
All right, we have more questions, but we're running out of time. So I want to thank everyone who's joined us today on this and who's joined us on this journey, because it was a fourth webinar, but it was number 3 of our 3-part how-to series. I know you have plenty of questions. I know you probably want to get access to number 1 and 2 of the series as well. Leia, you know how what's going to happen after today when it comes to sharing this, right?
We have, so basically what's going to happen is we're going to send an email with the link to the recording of this webinar. Sam, have you saved the chat with the question?
Yes, I have. I've been saving the chat.
Okay, then we're also going to take some time. We won't send this directly for obvious reasons, but in the coming days or maybe probably next week, as soon as we can, we're going to send you an answer. We'll write out the answers to all of the questions that you've answered. All the questions that you've asked, so that you can get answers on those. We'll be sharing as much information as we can. So in the email that we're sending now, we'll also send the link for part 1 and 2 of this series. They're also available on YouTube, but you'll get them directly into your email as well. And if you guys want to reach us, we will also include all of our LinkedIn's, emails, all of our contact details, where you can contact us if you have any further questions or any further comments or want to connect with us, then you'll be able to do so as well. But like Sam said, thank you so much. I also really want to thank both Luke and Nathan as well for joining us on this one too. It's definitely worth looking into the companies that they're running, because they're doing some really great things in the space too. And I have had an absolute pleasure with these with this little how-to series that we've done. So I'm sad. I'm really sad that this is ending, but it's been so fun, and thank you for everyone who's joined as well, because it's such an important topic, and it's great to see so many people want to show up for it.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Take care and stay safe.